Today's guest on House of Burgess podcast is Paul Parker. He's an experienced leader in death investigation whose career placed him at the intersection of public service, trauma, and truth. He's the author of newly released memoir, In the Shadows of Death, Writing Life's Final Chapter. This book brings to light the silent toll of working in death care and the healing power of vulnerability. Nice to have you, Paul.
Aaron, thank you.
So let's talk about your career and your arc and your background. How'd you get in the work?
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks again for the opportunity. So basically, I was a police officer. I got into police work when I was 18. Wound up going to the police academy when I was old enough to do that. Graduated when I was 21. About a year later, I pulled over a car in the middle of the night. One thing led to another. Foot pursuit. Wound up getting into a shooting. A gentleman who I'd been chasing got on top of me. I mean, we wrestled around and got on top of me. He was choking me out. So I thought I was going to die. So I wound up, I had to shoot him. He then beat me up pretty good, took my gun and tried to shoot me. And so that was my second encounter with death. But I was raised by my grandmother. She was fairly young. She was diagnosed with terminal cancer, died at 54. I was there when she died in our living room. Didn't really know how to deal with that. So those two things of death made me begin to think, well, what would happen, especially the shooting? What would happen if I died? Like, where would my body go? Like, what would happen to me? Not spiritually, but like physically. And so I started volunteering at a medical examiner's office, working part-time while I was a police officer at the medical examiner's office in Phoenix. That's how the career started. And over the last 26, 27, 28 years, I've been supervisor, manager, or executive level positions at 5 offices throughout the southwestern United States, to include Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, and Vegas, and then a small agency between Phoenix and Tucson where they do executions for the state.
So that's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because you've had so much leadership experience in your work. But that story where you're wrestling with the gun with that guy, you didn't actually shoot him, did you?
I did shoot him. He was on top of me. And this is back in the day. It's crazy, right? This is before the influx of social media. However, this was in January of '93. So this was right after Rodney King and then the riots. And so I remember clearly, as a police officer, a brand new police officer, that was a big deal, even though I was right outside of Phoenix. But as I was wrestling around with this gentleman in the middle of the night, and then he got on top of me and was choking me, and I was about to go unconscious, I took my gun and I put it up to like right behind his ear, because I only had my right arm free. He was lying on my left hand. I couldn't breathe. He was, like I said, choking me. And the clearest thoughts came to my head. It was crazy. It was like, Paul, you're a white guy. He is a Mexican guy. You're lying in a backyard in the middle of the night. If you pull the trigger, they're going to say, and it's going to look as if you executed him. Crazy, crazy. And so then and those thoughts were correct. And there was no reason to shoot him, like to have the gun there. So I dropped it down, felt between 2 ribs. I could feel the muzzle go between 2 ribs, and I pulled the trigger. And then he beat the crap out of me and took the gun. And so, but isn't that wild? Back before George Floyd, Michael Brown, all of these things that have brought police relations with communities of color into focus, Rodney King was that one. And that impacted how I thought about how to handle it.
That's crazy. Yeah, you're super aware in that moment. Where do you think that awareness comes from? Was it a particular way you were raised, or people you were around, or?
It wasn't the way I was raised. And in the book, I talk about being raised by very racist people. My grandparents were, it was not the way I was raised. But I really when I was a police officer, I really took that seriously. And I really was in tune to what was going on in the world. I was in tune with the societal challenges. I was in tune with the difficulty in the relationships between police officers, and many of whom, let's be honest, many of whom look like me, white men, policing areas that were not white. So the Rodney King thing was eye-opening to me. It as a police officer, I was horrified. First off, I was like, I remember watching that video going, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. But get this. I then became an acquaintance of a former LAPD officer, like 20 years later. And I remember having the conversation about Rodney King with him. He's LAPD. And he said to me, well, the only reason that Rodney King happened is because they didn't hit him hard enough. I couldn't believe that. I said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I thought he was kidding. He said, no, they didn't hit him hard enough. If they would have had good, solid hits, they never would have gotten that out of control. Well, I'm sure there's a lot to say about that, right? But say, as a police officer, as a young police officer, again, I was only 22 when I got into the shooting. I wanted to make sure I was a good police officer. I wanted to make sure I was treating people fairly, and it was part of my nature anyway. But I really was in tune to how things looked, and I certainly didn't want it to be portrayed as such.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, it was a perfect dichotomy painted there. It was like there's cops that have interesting takes on how to police, and then you have like cops that are act in good faith and try to put their best foot forward.
Yeah.
But the public doesn't always see that. So, what do you think the public misunderstands about both working in law enforcement and in death investigation?
Well, for law enforcement, let's talk about that for a minute. Aaron, as you know, I mean, over the last, I did death investigation for a very long time, frontline stuff. And then I got into oversight of police solely, I mean, primarily for the purpose of trying to reduce in custody deaths in San Diego County. That led me to also look into police practicing at the county level, but then also I had a similar role with the city of San Diego to look at, just daily interactions between the community and law enforcement. So, as far as law enforcement goes, obviously there are concerns, long-standing, ingrained issues, generational. It's going to take a long time to even remedy some of those issues. I think you need law enforcement leadership that is open to that. But it's a culture change, right? A lot of the new guys and gals that are coming on, I think that's great. It's honestly, it's usually a lot of the older guys who have been around, guys and gals who have been around for a long time, and it's a different way for them to think. But you also have members of the community too who, their parent, they were raised a certain way. Their children are also experiencing this. They experience it. Their parents, their grandparents, and so it's a generational issue. It's very difficult. What I hope is that there can be conversations. I watched the city of San Diego and the county of San Diego, and a lot of times there are no conversations. It's one side speaking to the other, and that's problematic. So I also think that I'm happy that the misuse and abuse of police power with the advent of social media is out there. That you can put that stuff out there that people can see. As we all know, sometimes it's not the whole picture. It doesn't matter. I mean, what you're seeing, if it's egregious, it's egregious. But also, I think that's helpful. I think that can help start conversations. And police body cam, if it's used, if it's turned on and it's used and it's released and not cut and spliced, both sides cut and spliced to tell their narrative. But if it's out there and everyone knows it, the facts, I think that's great. I wouldn't be a police officer today. I'm not going to lie. My shooting, if I did that today, even though I was justified, even though the gentleman was choking me out, I'm sure that there would be people who would say that I shot an unarmed person of color. They'd be right, but they don't know. Now, so I have some mixed feelings about civilian oversight, and you know that. I know you and I have talked about that. I have many thoughts on how maybe it could be better, and that'll be the subject of my next book. For this book, I think what the public doesn't understand about that is number one, I don't think that they know that they exist. I think the general public believes that when someone dies or someone is dying, police respond to the scene, fire department personnel respond to the scene, paramedics respond to the scene. They are really it. And so that everyone believes that that's what they see and that they deal with. Well, I can tell you that in at least half of the population in the United States and all of the offices I worked at, all the offices I worked at, we were independent and we have death investigators. And in California, the death investigators, they're the ones that go out and say who the body is. They're the ones that do the death notifications, not police. And the medical examiner office is responsible for determining the cause of death and the manner of death. So cause of death being like a gunshot wound. Well, a gunshot wound could be accidental. It could be a suicide. It could be a homicide. It could be undetermined. And then there's one other matter, which is natural, which a gunshot wound wouldn't be. But so I think the public misunderstands, at least in California, at least in a standalone medical examiner office, the person knocking on your door way more often than not, to tell you that your loved one died is a medical examiner investigator. The people that are in that line of work at those offices, the ones that are assisting with the autopsies, the ones who are dealing with the families and releasing property and talking to them about death certificates and all that, everybody, toxicologists, everybody in that office deals with death all day, every day. Police officers don't deal with death every day. Police officers don't deal with death maybe even weekly. Fire department personnel may a little bit more, if someone is elderly or whatever, and they go and they confirm death. Every phone call, every interaction, death investigator, it's about death. And so for me, the toll that takes on people that do that job, if they're not properly cared for, is devastating. And I was almost one of those.
Yeah. So can you talk more about that? Like, you see crazy death stories all the time. You have to tell the family. Like, that's got to be
Absolutely, absolutely. And
you able to compartmentalize or
that's the only way to get by, I think. So what happens is and as I mentioned in the book, I could go. It didn't matter what kind of scene. You could get, okay, I'm going out to a motor vehicle accident where there are two people and there was a fire, or I'm going out to a dead infant or someone found in the mountains. It didn't matter what the scene was. I mean, I was always very respectful, because I believe in what we train our investigators, and in part what the title of the book talks about. It talks about writing life's final chapter. Everyone is living their life story right now. Everyone listening to this is living their life story. In about half the time in the United States, a death investigator will write that last chapter of your life story. There would be the ones that look at why what the circumstances leading up to your death, who you are, why you died, what you did to contribute to that death, if anything, what medical history you have, what social history you have, what mental health history you have, what you were doing, what drug use you do, anything. So I contend that it's those people that write that final chapter. So writing that final chapter, yes, it involves going out to the scene. Police will go to the scene. They're not allowed in California. They're not allowed to touch the body. If once a body is dead, the body is dead. Um, they're not allowed to touch the body, with the exception of looking for a donor card, donor information on
yeah,
someone,
on
which
like the
is
ID or something?
crazy, right? But
Yeah.
they can't touch the body. The medical examiner investigator, if it's a medical examiner death, they're not allowed to touch it until the medical examiner investigator gets there. It's the medical examiner investigator who does the photos, the external body exam at the scene, looking for injuries, looking for signs of natural disease, looking to see who that person is, safeguarding their property, and then going to that house if the family's not already there and notifying them that their loved one died. Every scene I went to, I would hold my hand up. I did it as a test. I would be driving to the scene and I'm going to a dead baby or 3 or 4 people in a house fire or a homicide suicide. And my hands were perfectly flat, didn't move. Every single time I'd leave the scene, and then I have a driver's license address and I'm going to go to that address to see if I notify the person's loved one, wife, mom, child, whatever. Every time, Aaron, shook
Every
every time.
yeah.
And because you didn't know that was where your impact was. You would go, you introduce yourself, you ask if they know the person, you ask if you could come in, if they could sit down, is there anyone else in the house?
It's tough.
And then I would always kneel down to their level and tell them a story, and always use the word that they died. So then you'd think your job is done, but it's not done. If you're any kind of good death investigator, you then have to get information after you gave it. You have to, now people, this is the worst news they're ever going to hear, probably.
Yeah.
And it's at that moment of impact. Now you got to learn about the person who died. You then begin to have to ask questions of, and it seems so intrusive, but I learned you have to ask difficult questions. But it's to lay that foundation. Okay, when was the last time you saw your husband? Did he have any health problems? How was he feeling? Mentally, how was he? Did he use any drugs? Did he drink? What did he do for work? You get all that information right then and there. And that was a skill, and not many people could.
It's got to feel like a betrayal, right? Like you go to meet somebody, and I feel like as humans, we try to give a nice person the benefit of the doubt. And you know that you have this tool, this information that's going to destroy this human being.
Yeah.
That's got to be
Yeah.
tough.
You know, you can look at it as that. And I think death investigators who don't work out, one of the reasons that they don't work out is because they think, I'm going to ruin these people's lives. I'm not going to be able to help them. There's nothing I can do. I can't save a life, but you really can. How you go about treating this person at that moment. I've seen death notifications, Aaron, done with knock on the door real lightly. No one answers, of course, because they can't hear you. You take a business card that says medical examiner and your name on the front of it, and on the back, write, please call us in reference to, and then leave a name and a case number, and put that on the door and
Yeah.
walk away. So there's your notification, right?
Yeah.
So that's not cool.
Yeah.
But I think that you have to, if you treat these people with the respect, passion, and dignity that they deserve, which, by the way, every person who died, we believe, deserves that as well. They're human. It is what it is. So I can tell you that the importance of that, and again, that's being vulnerable to a point. Although you don't want to cry at work and you don't want to, but you're connecting with a human at their lowest possible time. I have had people in subsequent years come up to me, and I write about one in the book, in Starbucks, and say, "Are you Paul Parker?" And I'm looking at this person like, well, I hope this person's not mad at me about something, because I don't remember this person. But they remembered me because I notified them of the death of their loved one a couple years earlier. And she said, "Can I give you a hug? Thank you for what you did. Thank you for how you did it." That is the ultimate compliment. That and also, you'd be surprised, Aaron, when you do it well, you get letters from people who say, "Thank you for telling me thank you for being the one to tell me about my son dying," or whatever. It's like, wow, that's how you know you did it right.
Yeah.
But it takes a toll. It takes a toll. It takes a toll on everybody who works in that field.
Switching gears a little bit, but still related. So we did a lot of pursuit evaluation of the procedures in STPD, and there's a guy from San Bernardino, where I'm from, a sheriff who died in a pursuit. Everybody knew this guy from where I'm from because he's a young dude. So it's like a really sad moment. But I know that there's a big debate about, like, how do you go about oversight of pursuits, and if it should be changed. And
Yeah.
even in the comments, you see people arguing about, was it going too fast, this and that. Like, what is your take on that?
Yeah, that's tough because, look, I have some very strong feelings about that, only because of what I've seen. Only because of being a death investigator, and only because of being an oversight professional, especially at the sheriff's department. Where people who have nothing to do with anything, and they're just going home. They're driving home from work, and next thing you know, they're getting T-boned by someone fleeing the police. And I understand that, you don't want to have restrictive policies on pursuits, because then anybody's going to do what they're going to do, and they're just going to commit crime you know without abandon. I get that. I understand that. Unfortunately, I'm sure, there need to be some pursuit, vehicles that you should be permitted to pursue. However, I still contend that it's a really ridiculous risk to put to put the person you're chasing, and to put yourself as a police officer, put that as your risk. And, having been a police officer, I've been involved in pursuits, and I've been involved in foot pursuits too. I'm opposed to all kinds of pursuits more often than not, because I almost died because I was in a foot pursuit. I was stupid enough to chase someone for something that was just ridiculous. It was crime, but it was ridiculous on top of that. But as far as vehicle pursuits, I simply ask the police officer who's engaging in the pursuit, what if this person crashes into my wife or my children? Is this pursuit worth it? And if the answer is yes, then I guess you should continue the pursuit. But if it's no, then what are we doing? Right? But again, I'm looking at it I've seen a lot of deaths.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, unfortunately, and Aaron, as you know, being the executive officer or executive director for a short time in the city of San Diego when a San Diego police officer died during a pursuit. And then the gentleman you're talking about up in San Bernardino, why?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, is it worth it? It's a touchy topic, but I simply say, if the officers can look and say, if it's my wife or my child that this person T-bones, even if they don't die, my wife and child, is it worth it? And then if the answer is yes, then there's your answer.
Yeah, it's sort of like a doctor or a nurse. Like if you've seen so much sickness and people getting hurt and dying, then you're going to be more cautious about dangerous, high risk activity.
Right. And look, I understand it. I understand it from all perspectives: a police officer, an oversight professional, and probably more importantly, a death investigator who has seen the end result firsthand too many times.
Yeah, and so I feel like policing is one of those professions where, because of the nature of the work, there's a lot of addictions. You know, I think law is one of those fields. I think dentistry is really high too.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
At least when I was a police officer, yeah. But you know what's funny? I thought it was actually worse when I became a death investigator. I thought when I was a police officer, and I became a police officer back in the day when, I was in police work in the late 80s and early 90s when I started, and it was mostly men, right? Or hardly any women. And then when I became a death investigator when I got into death field in the mid 90s and then became a death investigator in the late 90s, it was mostly men. And then it transitioned to mostly women in death. And I think right now it's still obviously mostly men in police work, I believe. I thought that the addiction and the outlook and the mental, the coping mechanisms of police, I didn't think that was going to be topped. I mean, a lot of alcohol, a lot of risky behavior, very risky behavior. A lot of it's sex related, of course. It just seems that's the way it is.
yeah, that's what I've heard from other police officers.
There's no doubt about it. It is a high. It's hyper vigilant. You're always on alert. You're always looking around, and you only usually associate with people who are very like minded. And that's what I saw in police work. And I was all in. I mean, I began to believe that if you weren't in police work, you were somehow suspect. You were always a suspect. But to be able to deal with the stress of the job, yeah, drinking was a thing. Death investigation, I've never seen anything like it. I've been in 5 offices, and with the exception of the smallest office I was in, uh, the other 4 offices, it was you drank yourself silly. You had sex with anything that moved, and sometimes if it didn't, I guess. I mean, you did you convinced yourself that the only people who understood what you did every day were your coworkers, and you had to do something to numb what you saw. Like you mentioned earlier in our conversation, did you compartmentalize? I can tell you that I've seen thousands and thousands of dead bodies, thousands, literally. I can't tell you, and parts and pieces. I,
Yeah,
I don't remember very many of them. I
yeah,
don't remember many families. Um, and I think but when you look at a normal person who's not in that line of work, if they come upon one person lying in the road who was shot, or one person that they see, that's in the street with a yellow blanket over them because they died in a car accident, they will never forget that ever for the rest of their lives. And we see it every day. And so, yeah, compartmentalize. But what I realize too is, a lot of us have very unhealthy coping mechanisms. And what I learned though, although I didn't listen at the time, because I crashed and burned, yeah, I was big time. I drank all the time. I didn't drink at work, never showed up drunk, but if I wasn't working, I was drunk. I'll tell you. And what I learned from a psychologist, who, I told him, I said, look, you can't give a death investigator a psych test because we're never going to pass. You just not even, let's not talk about that. He said that you're wrong. He said, it does not matter what you see. It does not matter what you experience. What matters is how you are dealing with it. If you are having sex with anything, shopping, uh, uh, risky gambling, risky, whatever your risky behavior is, going home and just vegging out, drinking, porn, whatever it is, yeah, you probably have a problem. If, however, you've seen the same things as that person, but yet you see counseling, you see your therapist, you take medication, you meditate, you exercise, you have healthy outlets, whatever they may be, a healthy hobby, you're going to be fine. He said, don't ever forget that. And so he told me that like 2006 when I was drinking a lot, a whole lot. And, uh, and I continued to do that for another 15, 14 years before it all caught up to me. And I wound up, going away for 3 months for mental health treatment. I don't know if that answers the question, but there's that toll. And it's these people who are out there on the front line. Death investigators are one of them. They're not looked at as a first responder. Oh, they're the last responders. Yeah, it's also a dangerous job. And it's also death all day, every day. So
How do you get there from the point where you're going home and you're kind of indulging in unhealthy vices, and then how do you make the switch to healthier vices, exercising, good diet, sunlight?
Well, for me, it was that proverbial you had to hit rock bottom, right? So for me, that's what it was. It was, I was on the top of the world. I was the chief deputy director for the Los Angeles County Department of Medical Examiner, alleged best office in the country. I was the highest ranking civilian there. I wasn't a doctor. I was responsible for the majority of the operations of the office, ultimately, even though the other people were really the ones doing the work. Um, I was that. I was in a relationship with a lady who I loved more than anything. I thought, man, I got the job. I got the girl. I got it all. And but I couldn't get away from the guy that kept looking back at me in the mirror every day. That dude was still there, and that guy was still talking to me every day. And I fought depression. I think since my grandmother, I think some biological, some
Yeah,
biology involved too, right? My
yeah.
dad was struggled with mental illness his whole life. And so I think for me, it just came crashing down where it's like, no, so I'm standing on railroad tracks and I'm trying to figure out, like, what's the strength, like I have my own gun, like, what am I, it was crazy, So it was then I realized, do I want to live or do I not want to live? Do I want to live or do I not want to live? And so ultimately it led to just saying, you know what, I have kids and I don't want to do that. I don't want to create that legacy for them. I'm sure. So I sought help. And then, like I said, ultimately that wound up with me going away for a couple of months and doing different treatments. And, uh, but even then, even after I got out of that, I still wasn't to where I should be. And so then pursued, I did electroshock therapy and then ketamine when I got out with the advice of a psychiatrist. And, that eventually worked. That seemed to help. In addition to then, it was almost like a reset.
What is that called? That treatment,
Well, the
therapy, and ketamine.
well that was it. So for me, it was going away to in-house place. I went to a place called the Refuge in Florida, and the only reason I went there is because that's what my insurance told me to do. Like I was like, look,
Okay.
I'm feeling like a mess here, and they sent me there. So I was there, and then I went to another. I was there, and then I went to another place for the electroshock therapy for a month, and then out again, out back to that place. So it was just a bunch of different treatment. A lot of it, Aaron. This book basically started. So part of the treatment was writing letters, which I thought was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of in my life. I'm going to write a letter to what? They said, well, write a letter to alcohol. I thought, this is crazy. This is crazy. I'm not doing this. But I thought, well, I got nothing else to really live for. I mean, why not give it a shot? So I'll write a letter to alcohol. So I write a letter to alcohol. And then after you write the letter, then you got to read the letter to your fellow patients in a big room with the therapist sitting there. I'm like, now I got to read it to people who are more, messed up than I am. Why am I doing this? Sure enough, the best advice I ever got was from those people. The best support I ever got was from those people. The best support and help I've ever been able to give to anybody has been those people. The writing of the letters, this book started, and it's interesting. That was my therapy. But when I got out, I still kind of was like, I didn't feel, I was very pessimistic about the future. So I started to take all those letters and put them together. And that's where this book came from. It was my last chapter. I was going to write my own last chapter. It was my suicide note. It was just like, I'm going to lay this all out for my kids so they can understand and have something to pass down, but then also explain. But then that seemed to be cathartic, and it seemed to be therapeutic. And so since then, I've been, like I said, I do what I have to do. I have very healthy outlets now. I continue to take the meds and, see the counselor and then work out and write, and haven't had a drink in over 5 years. I don't.
Congratulations.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. But
That's interesting that it seemed like you got really clear and you asked yourself a question: do I want to live or do I want to die? And from that point, you had to do an inventory of the things that you cared about, which for you were your children. And then that was like the impetus for you making the decision to live differently.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I in the grand scheme of things, my issues. When I was around, it's funny because when I was around all those other people who were having similar issues or even worse issues, I mean, some maybe not as bad. You know, it makes you realize, all of us have something. It's not just so I struggle with depression or whatever. All of us are carrying something. All of us have our own baggage. All of us have our own stuff. And what I realize is by being vulnerable to that, which I learned to do when I was doing death notifications, to be vulnerable, because you have to not just be an automaton, you have to be somewhat vulnerable
Yeah.
to
To
show that
relate.
you're being compassionate and empathetic and whatever. But yeah, I realized to be vulnerable might help people. To tell a story and to say, look, hey, I've had a similar walk, not your exact walk, but I've had a similar walk, and here I am, upright, alive, looking forward to every interaction with friends, every interaction, learning about people I don't know about. I'm like that annoying dude, like that is just going to start, hey, how you doing? Talk to you at the Starbucks or whatever, or just smile. We're here for a short time, man, and after a while, I didn't want to have anybody go to my kids and knock on their door.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful. So what would you like policymakers, the media, and families to better understand about your worldview, death investigation, or your book?
yeah, I think a couple things. First off, I think that I've been in a lot of offices in the southwestern U.S. and I've dealt with death investigators, interacted with them from all over the country, actually the world. And one of the things that seems to be pretty consistent, the management, the frontline supervision, many times of these folks is substandard at best. I've been in rooms where profanity is used and directed toward these people, where they are bullied, where they are shamed for having a feeling, for not sucking it up and moving forward. I think the management and the supervisors they need to understand and hopefully acknowledge that these are not just people or just numbers covering a shift. These are humans, and that their lives are in your hands, and you should be in tune as best as you can to any even subtle changes in their behavior or the way they're handling things, and also be in tune to and make the culture change that if someone goes out and it is a very horrific scene involving more than two or three decedents, or they're burned, or their babies, or more than one, institute some kind of check-in with them, just to talk to someone. If they don't want to talk, they don't have to talk. I mean, something like that. Walk the walk, walk the walk. Get out there, keep yourself active in the field, in the death investigation field. Don't just stay in your office. Do what you can do to be out among the people doing this job and go to scenes with them and be with them. I do think that that's right. I do think that they have the responsibility to attain, train, and maintain. Attain the right people, train them, and help them to maintain themselves as well. I think that as far as policymakers, no one really cares about people who are doing that line of work in that line of work, because no one cares about the dead unless it's your loved one or your friend. And I hate to say this, but many times it's like no one really thinks about what happens to the garbage until the trash workers go on strike, and it starts piling up. Until it impacts you, whether you're a board of supervisor or you're a city council member or you're a governor or a state legislator, no one thinks about it. So I think that you have to understand that there are people out there who are toiling in the shadows, doing work that no one, hardly anyone can do. And there needs to be a way to give them the proper due credit and the mandatory emotional well-being that they deserve. So, and I think as far as media, I think the media, a lot of people, and Aaron, know this because in civilian oversight, I always contended that the media should be our best friends. I mean, the media can tell the story. The media were the first true oversight practitioners of any government. They're the ones that were always, and they're not right all the time. They make things, they blow things out of proportion or they don't get their facts right. But many times they're bringing things to light that no one else knows about. And so, as far as the media goes for death investigation, I want them to understand that death investigation is not just about a forensic pathologist, it's not just Dr. G or Dr. Baden in New York City or these, all these famous doctors. No, it's about the people that are picking up the bodies, doing the exams, doing the autopsies, doing the meeting with families, and doing the toxicological testing, you name it, property release, all those things. I think that's critical. And if the media can shine a light, and in my book, I talk about 5 different offices. Some did things good. Some, in my opinion, were awful. And the focus is not on the customer. The focus is not on the family member who's lost a loved one. And I think the media, if they can look into that and paint that picture and tell that story, then hopefully we can improve death investigation practices. They can help us improve death investigation practices for the families, for those who have died, and for the general public across the country.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like leadership has a big role to play in death investigations and protecting health workers and professionals in your field.
I agree. Again, everyone thinks it's a cool job. Oh, you work at the coroner's office, or you work at the medical examiner's office. It's nowhere close to cool.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
would think it was tough.
it's a tough job,
Yeah.
but it is a noble profession, honorable job, and but you got to have the right people, and you got to have the focus correctly. It's so funny with death investigators. All these agencies across the country, they all want to focus on mass fatality. They do big mass fatality drills, mass fatality. They do more training on mass fatality, which, by the way, most mass fatality drills end when someone says, call the medical examiner. I mean, it's just the police that are drilling it in the fire department. But regardless, the medical examiner offices seem to focus on that so much. They don't focus on the day-to-day, the regular death investigations, and more importantly, the people doing the job. What do they need to maintain? What do they need to be able to provide compassionate, thorough, professional, timely service to those loved ones? If you think about it, these people can get so jaded. I was one of them. These people can get so jaded. Every phone call is about a death. And so you might be a little rude or short or whatever, but everybody calling you is only calling you once. That family member is only interacting with you one time, that office on one occasion, unfortunately. And if they're left with someone that doesn't care or sounds like they don't care or they're not taking the time to really dive into or they're getting the little things wrong, that's problematic. So I think that hopefully we can shine a light and you can help shine a light on the importance of death investigation professionals in all aspects of an office and the people doing the notification and those writing of the final chapter of someone's life story. I think that's critical.
You've definitely said some things that people are going to be able to glean some insight from, and you might help some people. You might help a lot of people.
I hope so.
So thank you. I bought my version of In the Shadows. I've been able to dig into it a couple months ago because you kind of let me in as you're writing it. But
Yeah.
what legacy do you hope this book leaves behind?
It's funny. People say that. People have been saying that word to me. I don't know if I'm about to die or not, but people keep asking me about legacy and legacy. I think one of the things, I think anybody who's ever worked with me, I'd like the legacy to be that I care about them as a person, And there are many reasons for that. Number one is because I do. But number two is they weren't just someone just filling a shift. I want the legacy I want the book to help improve death investigation practices throughout the country. I want it to improve the environment for the death investigators. I want it to improve the management and supervision and the people who are in those roles because you know how it is. Like who leaves? Many times, death investigators would rather be in the office or be out of the office investigating the death of a baby than sit in the office and listen to their bosses and supervisors pontificate about the way things were, about how great they are, or about all these other things, or just dealing with the toxic culture that they're listening to, or, So my hope is that we can somehow take care of the people in all aspects of death investigation. And that also includes, you have people that work at funeral homes and for organ procurement. I mean, there's a lot of death care workers and they fly under the radar. But my true passion is death investigators. So I hope the legacy is to improve their environment to the best as possible, and improve death investigations throughout the country.
Yeah, in the shadows, it's on Amazon. Where else? I mean, that's where people can primarily go to buy it. Or
Yeah, Amazon's a big deal. I mean, you can get all three. You can get the Kindle paperback, hardback. It's all you do is Google the title. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's not in the stores yet. It's in there. You can order it from Barnes and Noble. You can order it. If you're listening outside of the country, like Canada, it's Indigo, and all over the world, it's easy to get online. Absolutely.
I love it. Well, Paul, thank you for sitting down and having this conversation. I think there's a lot people need to learn about death investigations, the entire field. There's a lot of people in the field that can learn something from your book. And, it's always a pleasure to sit down and hear your stories.
Aaron, thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for trying to bring light to these things. And as far as I go, as far as social media, I'm on Instagram at Paul Parker Books, and I have a very big presence on LinkedIn. My Facebook was hacked or something, so I'm not on there. But otherwise, I'll be putting out updates and then blogging on my website, paulparkerconsulting.com, about death investigation practices and how we can improve and move forward. And I'm always available to come out, do book signings, or speak to members of the community, media. It doesn't matter. I'll talk to anyone, anywhere, and get the word out about what it is we do and how we can do it better. So thanks
Yeah,
for helping me shine a
I'm
light.
looking forward to getting my book signed. Lastly, is there anyone you think should come on the House of Burgess podcast in particular?
There are a couple of death investigation professionals that I would love to have. John Fudenberg was the coroner in Las Vegas in Clark County. I was his assistant, but he was the coroner when the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting occurred. He can give you a lot of pointers on how to live, but also the importance of death investigation. He's the number one person, I think, as far as death investigation goes. Dr. Jonathan Lucas, who will be the chief medical examiner in San Diego next month. He's a good person to talk to. Barbara Butcher. Dr. Lucas was also the chief medical examiner in Los Angeles. Barbara Butcher also has a book out. She's a former death investigator. She was a big wig at the New York City Office of Medical Examiner. Barbara Butcher is another person. So I think as far as death investigation, those are the three that I place a lot of stock into. There's also a gentleman who has his own podcast called Coroner Talk, Darren Dake. So those four people I think would be good as far as death investigation, have further conversations.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. We'll always stay in contact, but thank you. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for what you do, Aaron. Thank you.